Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. In this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of February the 17th and 18th, 2024. So if you're familiar with the format, I look at the astrology and I Ching for the day or the weekend I'm covering, and then I do have a special topic. And I kind of got my dates wrong. I was sure that Sunday was February the 19th, and of course February, it's not, it's February the 18th. So the two people I'm covering in this video are actually born on the 19th. They're born on Monday, so they haven't really got their birthdays this weekend. Nonetheless, I've done some preparation on their charts, and so I'm going to sort of cover their charts early. So just remember, their birthdays are on Monday. They're not this weekend. And those two people are Prince Andrew, who was born on February the 19th, 1960, and he will have his 64th birthday on Monday. And the other person I want to look at is Karen Silkwood. Karen Silkwood was born on February the 19th, 1946, and she was possibly murdered, possibly had an accident, we don't really know, on November the 13th, 1974. I've always found her fascinating, partly because I find radiation fascinating. I mean, in fact, I actually own a Geiger counter. Here you go. That's my Geiger counter. You can see what the radiation level is here. It looks as if it's 46 counts per minute, which is normal, obviously. There's nothing particularly radioactive here. But yes, I find her fascinating, and her story is fascinating, though horrific in a way. So she was a worker in a nuclear power, not a nuclear power plant, a nuclear factory in Oklahoma. Part of the thing they did was, I think they created sort of rods which had, I think, plutonium in them for the nuclear power industry. And she worked in this plant, and she became aware that the company was cutting corners, and she got involved with the union, and she sort of testified, and yeah, she annoyed people in the company, and she was contaminated with plutonium. We don't quite know how. She suddenly would get plutonium contamination in very strange situations where she didn't have access to it. And plutonium was found in her house, and we don't know quite how the plutonium got there. And she, on November the 13th, she was apparently on the way to a meeting with a journalist from the New York Times. This is November the 13th, 1974. And on that evening, her car was reported as having an accident, I think at 8:05 p.m. And yeah, she was dead. So we don't really know what happened. Was it just an accident? Was she murdered? It was said that she left on her car journey to meet the journalist, that she had a great wad of documentation with her, and that documentation wasn't there when her car was searched. So I wanted to look at Karen Silkwood's horoscope. I think it is a very interesting horoscope. Not only that, it has a very prominent Chiron. I've been talking about Chiron recently, and I think if you use Chiron, I think you will find her chart fascinating. But before I talk about the horoscopes of Prince Andrew and Karen Silkwood, I want to look at the astrology and I Ching for this weekend, which is a weekend of February the 17th and 18th, 2024. So by and large, the moon is in Gemini throughout the weekend. That you can see. This chart, by the way, is set for midnight, where Saturday becomes Sunday, the very middle of the weekend, and at that time the moon is at 24 Gemini. So yeah, it's a Gemini weekend. Gemini is about movement. It's about intellectual flexibility and wanting variety. And it is quite an airy weekend. There's a lot of stuff in air signs. You can see up here we've got Venus, Mars, Mercury, Sun, and Pluto, 5 planets in Aquarius. Plus we've got the moon in Gemini. So we've got 6 of the 10 planets, if we use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. 6 of the 10 are in air signs. In terms of the traditional planets, if we don't use Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, then 5 of the 7 are in air signs. Yeah, so it's quite airy. The emphasis is on thinking. The emphasis is not so much on feeling and touching. Notice also in this chart that there are no planets in fire signs. Now, when you don't have any planets in fire signs, things can seem sometimes a little flat. So, it's all very well to have lots of ideas. Gemini, Aquarius, moon in Gemini, the Aquarius planets. But where is the spark? It might feel this weekend it just isn't quite that spark. Lots of ideas. Everything is properly prepared, lots of interesting people, but where is the spark to make it all happen? And I think that might be the problem. So it might be an interesting weekend, but it may not be an exciting weekend. Even though on Saturday there is a square aspect between Mercury and Uranus. So you can see that Mercury is at 21:55, 22 Aquarius. Uranus is at 19 Taurus. So particularly on Saturday, Mercury is making a square to Uranus. I think that this square will dominate the weekend. And that is about interesting ideas. It's about saying things that might get a very immediate reaction. We're certainly looking for something new. But just remember that Mercury square Uranus is in air signs. It's all about... Sorry, it's not in a... Mercury is in an air sign. Uranus is obviously in an earth sign. But yeah, I think that that Mercury-Uranus square, we might discover interesting things, and we might also find that the things we say get a very immediate reaction. But that's not quite the same as having real excitement. It's not quite the spark that we need to get things going. Perhaps just means too much talking, too many ideas, but not enough action. Also this weekend, Venus is conjunct Pluto. I've already talked about Venus conjunct Pluto and sort of what it might mean. The basic idea of Venus conjunct Pluto is it's about intensity. Venus is about relating. Pluto is about hiding things, being quite obsessive. So there might be a little bit of obsession and jealousy with that Venus conjunct Pluto, but it is in Aquarius. Aquarius is not a particularly emotional sign. It's traditionally it's one of the least emotional signs of the 12. So I think there are limits to how much that obsession is going to go. I'm not talking about that sort of deep scorpionic jealousy with Venus conjunct Uranus, Venus conjunct Pluto. Not really, but still, once we sort of focus on something, we're going to be really want to stick with it, and I think that our ideas about other people may be quite fixed. We're not going to change our minds about people, whatever they do, whatever they say. Now, Venus is a planet connected with money, often connected with money. So perhaps with Venus conjunct Pluto, money is going to matter to us, all of us. And we're going to be quite concerned that we don't spend too much money. We're going to be very concerned about what is ours. And we're also going to be concerned that people don't take or use what is ours. And that's not just possessions. It might even be ideas. We might be quite jealous of our own ideas. So when we see someone using our ideas, we might get upset. But we do have to remember that, isn't imitation the sincerest form of flattery? So maybe we should be flattered if people start using our ideas. We see things we've intellectually created used by someone else. We shouldn't be too bothered by that. Besides, nothing new. There's nothing new under the sun. We might think that we're being completely original, but everything's been discovered before, hasn't it? Isn't that the case? Now, this conjunction between Venus and Pluto, it's more important than it seems, because you can see that Venus is about 2 degrees off from Mars and Venus is 2 degrees off from Pluto. So what that means is that Venus is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. So with Venus on the Mars-Pluto midpoint, relationships could become a bit complicated. Okay, we're not talking about sort of desperate obsession, desperate and dangerous obsession, but there's still, in terms of relationships, there is a bit of jealousy going on, and obsessiveness, and it's just I think we have to be careful of having fixed ideas about another person. We might make assumptions about how this person is supposed to behave, what they're supposed to do, what they're supposed to be doing with their lives. But we do have to remember that, you are not the only individual. That's very easy to think. We can think that we are the only person who is really thinking on this planet, and everyone else is just an object. Yeah, it's easy to objectify people, particularly when all that stuff in Aquarius. So, you are not the only person on the planet, unless you think this whole universe was created for your amusement. And so you have to understand that other people have the same issues and thoughts and perceptions as you do. I know that sounds obvious, but it's not obvious, because we all do it. We all objectify people. We all place ourselves in the center of the universe. And I think that Venus conjunct the Mars-Pluto midpoint does remind us that that's not such a healthy thing to be doing. Overall, I would have said that Saturday is a busier day from Sunday. On Sunday, there aren't so many major aspects. Probably the major aspect on Sunday is a decile between Venus and Saturn. You can see here that Venus is at 2 Aquarius, Saturn is at 8 Pisces. So decile between Venus and Saturn. I think, particularly with all this stuff in Aquarius, some of us are going to want to make a special effort to be aloof and detached and not to be emotional. We're going to want to give the impression that we don't really care about other people. We're not bothered. That we can look after ourselves. We might even try to give the impression that we can be a bit cold. It feels more comfortable that way, and maybe we just don't want to address our own feelings. It's better to just pretend we don't have any feelings. I'm saying that as a Gemini, but that may be how Venus decile Saturn works, because the decals are about style, the attempt to create a particular style. So we are attempting to create a rather cold and aloof style there. Now, the moon does move into Cancer. Well, it depends where you are. If you're in London, the moon will move into Cancer Monday morning, very early Monday morning. So if you're outside the Americas, really the moon is absolutely going to be in Gemini all weekend. If you're in New York, the moon moves into Cancer at 10:25 p.m. on Sunday. If you're in Los Angeles, it moves into Cancer at 7:25 p.m. So on Sunday evening, if you're in the Americas, you might notice a bit of a change as the moon moves from Gemini to Cancer. The emotional temperature might rise a bit. Perhaps there's more scope for sensitivity. But it's very brief. It's just really for a few hours. And I suppose it depends what you're doing on Sunday evening. But I suppose if you're mixing with people on Sunday evening, you might notice a bit of a change. People becoming more emotional and more sensitive on Sunday evening. But that's really if you're in the Americas. And if you're in New York, that change would happen very late, at sort of 10:25. So you'd only have an hour and 35 minutes of the weekend left with the moon in Cancer. As far as midpoints are concerned, there is one midpoint that I probably should mention, and that is a midpoint involving Mercury. You can see that Mercury is at 21 Aquarius, and you can perhaps also see that it's about 17 degrees short of Mars on one side, and it's about 17 degrees short of Saturn on the other side. So that means that Mercury is exactly conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Now, Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. In fact, someone in the comments asked me about Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint just a few hours ago, and asking me what Alfred Witter said about Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. There are these concerns with Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Mercury is about thinking and our thoughts and how our brain is working. And some of us might actually be quite negative. We might be dwelling on things which are a bit grim, sickness and the impermanence of life. And maybe we're thinking about how everything is going to be coming to an end. We may actually think too much with Mercury on a Mars-Saturn midpoint. Just have a load of negative thoughts that just get out of control. And if we see something that's wrong or might be wrong, we might obsess about it and worry about how things could get much worse. So I think we need to be a bit careful there. So if you find yourself involved in bouts of negative thinking, maybe you should consider the possibility that it's really caused by Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, which is a short-lived aspect, this Mercury conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint. Mercury will move off the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So you don't want the weekend to be spoilt by a bout of negativity. And, that negativity could also be reflected in what you say. We might say things that are sort of negative and that see the world in the worst possible light. Now, there's no harm in being realistic. Maybe you are absolutely justified in being negative. Maybe people need to know. There is this cult of positive thinking. I don't know. Being in America, I don't know. Is it global? I don't know. In America, it seems to be pretty strong. People find it really difficult to say that, oh, things are bad. Things are bad in some ways, yes, I know. But it's difficult in America, in particular, to have negative thinking. And so, if you're in America, that might be a problem. It might be a particular problem. Everyone's happy saying how wonderful things are, but a lot of us know that it's not wonderful at all. So yes, it's good to be realistic, but don't be too realistic, and don't make it personal. By that I mean, we can be negative about the world, and because the world seems bad, we might start to be negative about ourselves. But when in reality, this is the world we're born in. This is the world we're living in, and that's the way it is. Okay, so having looked at the general picture astrologically for today, I want to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the weekend of February the 17th and 18th, 2024. Aries, you do have a lot to say. Moon's going through Gemini, and you may have a particular point that you're really keen to express. And yes, the words will come out. You will be able to say what's on your mind. But you shouldn't necessarily expect an immediate impact. People may not be particularly excited by what you have to say. And that can be difficult. You think you've got something exciting to say. You think you're going to get a reaction. But you may not quite get the reaction you're looking for. I think that part of it may be that the world around you may in some ways be tired. People have just had enough. I mean, I don't mean had enough of you. They've just had enough. And you might just experience this negativity around you. People want to stick to what is safe and what is secure. And I think, Aries, you do need to respect this. You might feel instead, you have to do something to stir things up. You might just have to say something dramatic, anything to get people moving, to get people responding, even if you have to offend them. But no, I don't think so, Aries. I think it's just best to sort of sit back and accept the situation as it is. And maybe, Aries, what you need to do is concentrate on the areas this weekend where you will be appreciated, and concentrate on the people who will appreciate you. So perhaps you shouldn't be too experimental. There are some people who think you are wonderful. And, Aries, I should say, Aries is arguably the most exciting sign of the zodiac. Aries, you're the one that often gets things moving. If you're the one that sort of creates excitement and inspiration and action. And so, if you're in the wrong places, that natural ability is just not going to be appreciated. There are only very few areas where you are going to be appreciated this weekend. But those areas do exist, and those people do exist. So there are people, maybe you haven't seen them recently, who do find you genuinely exciting, and maybe you're just a tonic. So perhaps, Aries, you should be considering who you should be mixing with. Who would really like you to be around? Who would enjoy your company? And then make the appropriate movements. And also from an Aries perspective, to this weekend with the moon in Gemini, there's a certain amount of emphasis on short distance traveling. Maybe a short distance journey to visit someone could really make the difference. So yes, I mean that is something that perhaps you should be thinking about. Now, in terms of relationships, it's a kind of a mixed picture. I think you might find that some of the people are being a bit standoffish, especially on Sunday. They may not want to reveal to you their true selves, their true feelings. They may not be particularly inviting. You might sort of sense a certain amount of coldness. The moment you sense that kind of standoffishness, that coldness, you have to then decide what to do. Do you just accept it, just leave this person to their devices, or do you challenge it? I think it might be best to accept it. Just accept it if people are a little detached. And just be yourself and just work on a sort of intellectual, mental level. On Sunday, the moon is making a trine to Mercury. That trine to Mercury really should allow you to communicate effectively. You may feel, as you're speaking, that the words are having no impact, but don't worry about it. You're doing your best, and in that way, by not pushing people, by not trying to create a crisis, you're allowing people to get used to you. Maybe that's what they need to do, and maybe they need to realize that there's no point in having a particularly cold or aloof style. It just doesn't work. There's no point. And maybe in the end, Aries, you can sort of warm people up and get them to come out of their shell. Taurus. This weekend, I think in some respects you are going to continue to be concerned about money. I mean, that makes sense, doesn't it? I mean, the moon is in Gemini. And from a Taurus perspective, Gemini is about money. I mean, Gemini is, the second house after Taurus. It's a house. Gemini. It represents the sign immediately after Taurus. Taurus is kind of who you are, and Gemini is what you own. And you'll be thinking about what you own and what you don't own. That might bother you. And I think it's very important that you don't have a grudge about it. You don't feel that you don't own enough. That's not a good approach. You particularly in terms of comparisons. There's always a temptation to compare what you earn, what you own, with what someone else earns and owns. But I don't think that is constructive. Instead, you need to be thinking about, what kind of changes you can make. And if you are working over the weekend, which I suppose you might be, does seem that there are useful things you can do. from a material and financial perspective. I think you will be quite sharp. I think you will understand what's going on and what needs to be done. And even if you aren't able to literally create extra money for yourself, you are going to be able to interact very well with whoever you need to interact with, whether it's clients, co-workers, or maybe it's about just planning. In fact, planning might be a good thing to do today, this weekend. I mean, remember, and I said it in the introduction, that there's nothing in fire. There are no planets in fire signs this weekend. So actual action may be difficult. I mean, of course, it doesn't help that it's a weekend. Some people aren't working over the weekend. But with all these planets in air signs, from a Taurian perspective, this should allow your ideas to flow. So maybe this weekend you can make plans for the week ahead, and I think those plans will be pretty effective. Now, there is a serious edge to the weekend, and that relates to Venus, which is your ruling planet. So Venus this weekend is at around sort of 2 Aquarius, but it is conjunct Pluto and it is conjunct Mars, and Venus is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. I think you may feel that. Venus on the Mars-Pluto midpoint is about a single focus. And that Venus on the Mars-Pluto midpoint is in Aquarius, which is a fixed sign. I think that Taurians will, in the end, realize that there is just one thing that matters. You might have a few concerns, but really there's only one thing. And this one thing could be something that you want to just put all your energy into. And that's what you're going to want to do. Is this the right thing to do? Yes, I think it probably is. So I know that the moon is in Gemini, and that the moon in Gemini is about variety and doing several different things. But you're not a Gemini. You're a Taurus. Taurians work best when they have just a single goal. Of course, they're at their most dangerous when they have a single goal. But if you can find the right goal this weekend, something to really throw everything you got into it, then I think you'll be able to achieve a considerable amount. Not just this weekend, but we're talking about, over the next few days into next week. You are very focused, and you could be very impressive. Now, looking at relationships, Venus is starting to move closer to Mars. Venus represents you because Venus is ruler of Taurus. Mars represents the other person because Scorpio is your opposite sign. Mars rules Scorpio, and so Venus is moving to a conjunction of Mars. Yes, it does seem that you and someone else are moving closer, but you have to perhaps be patient. Venus and Mars are in Aquarius. This is an air sign. There is a certain amount of detachment. And if you want to get close to someone, for whatever reason, the way to do it is really through logic and communication and just talking to them. I don't think this is this Venus on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. It might seem to be passionate because you've got Venus and you've got Mars and you've got Pluto, but it is Aquarius. It is in Aquarius. Yes, it's single-minded, but any relationship that's worth bothering with needs to be taken slowly. Just too much intensity, too much passion could spoil things. Gemini. There is a certain amount of excitement this weekend, or as much excitement as a Gemini could provide. In other words, there are limits. You're going to try your hardest, but as I said at the beginning of this video, when I was talking about the overall planetary situation, there are no planets in fire signs at the moment. Geminis often like a little bit of fire. Geminis, they have all these ideas, but just ideas on their own can be of limited value, and they can end up being a bit boring. I mean, even if the ideas in themselves are brilliant, ideas for the sake of ideas just kind of get nowhere. And I think every Gemini actually realizes that at heart. Geminis do have lots of ideas, and this weekend, yes, with Mercury, your ruler, making a square to Uranus, you are going to have ideas, and you're going to want to be heard, and there's going to be an impatience to it. Yes, people have to listen, and you're going to be very focused on these ideas. Maybe you're going to be too precious about some of your ideas. You think they are brilliant. You think they're really important. But by the time you actually express them, by the time you have a chance to tell people what is on your mind, you listen to the words coming out of your mouth, and the words just don't sound quite as good as they sounded when you were thinking about them. And this may indicate that it's not always the best thing to talk about what's on your mind. Rather, you should sort of play it through, act it out, experiment with it, see if it works. That may create a bit of delay. But it's really all about rehearsal, and it's about seeing how the world is going to respond before you actually express yourself. So, yes, when you do start talking about things that you sound important, that you think are important, there is some danger that you end up being disappointed. And I think part of the problem is just going to be not with you, but your audience. Your audience is just not particularly excitable. That's perhaps because of a lack of fire signs. So it's perhaps important not to have expectations, and maybe to keep a lot of stuff to yourself. Have your private realizations. Be excited by your own private realizations, and don't feel that the world needs to know about them. The world, doesn't need to know. And I think matters are sort of not helped, but particularly on Saturday, the moon is making a square to Saturn. Okay, that's probably at the beginning of a weekend. I think you can feel that. So the moon in Gemini on probably early on Saturday. It depends where you are. The moon in Gemini is making a square aspect to Saturn in Pisces, and it just may feel that you can't quite express yourself. There are blocks, but I wouldn't worry about it too much. And maybe that moon square Saturn on Saturday is going to spur you to put in some extra work to create structure. I mean, that's what Geminis sometimes need. It's all very well having lots of ideas, but if there's no structure, are these ideas actually going to get anywhere? Possibly not. Now, continuing on the theme of your ideas and the way you're relating to the rest of the world, I should point out that Mercury, your ruler, is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. And some Geminis may kind of get into a spiral of negativity. Mars-Saturn is quite a difficult pairing. It is about negativity. It's about thoughts of sort of death and decay and hopelessness. Now, I'm not encouraging you to go down that road, but I'm just saying there's a danger. But in certain situations, you might be overly negative. And because you're overly negative, you might create a negative impression. And so if you're concerned that the world is rather lifeless, your own reactions to the world could make it even more lifeless, and the things you say could not make people happy. But you do have to talk about what's on your mind, some of your negativity. I mean, being a Gemini, you understand that sometimes negativity is appropriate. You find it actually quite difficult to just live in the moment, because Geminis are always thinking. And Geminis are always thinking about what could go wrong. And so with Mercury on a Mars-Saturn midpoint, you might reach some really disturbing conclusions. Although you might have to, it might also be about who you're dealing with. You might choose particular people to hang out with, almost on an unconscious level. And these people may themselves have a negative view of the world. Maybe these people have genuine problems, have genuine issues. I don't know, it could be health issues, for example. Alfred Witter, when he talked about Mercury on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, two words he used, or a hyphenated word, was I can't remember. Well, he used the word sick call. Now, are you going to be making sick calls over the weekend? Well, okay, maybe if you're a Gemini doctor or physician, you'll be making sick calls. But it may be about the people you interact with. Maybe at some level they are sick. They've got a problem. They've got something that needs to be dealt with. And I don't necessarily mean sick in a physical sense or even a psychological sense. Just something's wrong. So you may be interacting with people this weekend where something is wrong. And if something is wrong, maybe it's your job to sort of see what you can do to heal the problem, healing friends. That may be something you have to do through your words. It might not seem possible, but we mustn't forget that this weekend, or not just this weekend, but overall, one of the big general things going on in the universe at the moment is a conjunction between Chiron and the North Node in a sector of the Gemini chart that's very much associated with friends. So maybe this is a time where you need to help some of the people you know get round particular issues and see what you can do to be a Gemini healer. In terms of close relationships, I mean, I'm not saying that everything is going to be wonderful, but I suppose you have to realize what you might do to undermine relationships. Negativity in the wrong place could really put people off. Just too much talking about difficult subjects, unless it is appropriate, might not be a particularly good idea. Cancer. Well, Cancer, the moon continues to move through Gemini, and that does mean, in a general sense, that you are going to be fairly introspective, or at least more introspective than usual. I think that you will value your own company, and you can interact with other people, but I'm not convinced that you're going to be able to interact with other people in any great depth. I mean, matters aren't helped by the fact that certainly at the beginning of a weekend, the moon, which is your ruler in Gemini, is making a square aspect to Saturn, and Saturn can sort of put a damper on everything. You just can't really express yourself as you would like, and you may feel that some of the people close to you are just trying to close you down, and are just preventing you from sort of being yourself. But it's a short-term aspect, this moon square Saturn, and I think just in general, it's just important that you're in control. That really is going to matter. I think as the weekend progresses, you're probably going to find it easier to express yourself. On Sunday, the moon is making a trine to Mercury. That does allow you to communicate in your way. It has to be done absolutely on your terms, with the right people that you know and trust. I don't think it's really a day for hanging out with people you don't know and trust. I think that because this weekend, I think you do have a certain sort of suspicious nature. You don't take people at face value, however pleasant and nice they are. You take the view that it's probably just a facade. You understand this weekend that people have their own agendas, their own motives, and you can't believe anything they say, and you don't regard them as being sincere. Now, you may be being overly suspicious. You probably are, but I think you take the view it's better to be safe than sorry. So that I think is the overall picture. The work is happening from a Cancerian perspective on a sort of an inner psychological level. Although it's possible that some Cancerians this weekend are going to be involved in a lot of research, going deep into things, finding out the facts, looking under the surface. So if you're a Cancerian detective or an investigator, there's going to be lots of interesting things that you can discover. Now, right at the end of the weekend, if you are in the Americas, the moon does change sign. The moon does move into Cancer. So if you are in New York, the moon moves into Cancer at 10:25 p.m. on Sunday. If you're in Los Angeles on Sunday, the moon moves into Cancer at 7:25 p.m. So if you're in the Americas, right at the end of the weekend, Sunday evening, there might be a change, and suddenly it might feel that a weight is lifted off your shoulder, that you can all of a sudden be more yourself. But that's something that's not really going to be an issue if you're a European or Asian or Australasian Cancerian, because then the moon's in Gemini all weekend. But even if you're in the Americas, that little bit at the end on Sunday evening. It's going to be very brief, but perhaps you can take advantage of it. So overall, Cancer, I'm sorry not to be more optimistic about the weekend, but I'm not saying it's a bad weekend at all. Just do what feels right. It's okay to be suspicious. And yeah, do some investigating, do some research, because I think you might discover something very useful. Leo. Well, it is a kind of a changeover time for Leos, because the sun is your ruler, and very soon the sun is moving into Pisces. I think the sun moves into Pisces on Monday morning. Well, it depends on where you are. In London, I think it moves into Pisces at 4:13 a.m. on Monday morning. If you're in New York, Los Angeles, then right at the end of Sunday, the sun moves. So not the moon. It's not the moon moving into Pisces. It's the sun moving into Pisces. But even then, with the sun moving from Aquarius to Pisces, you may feel a little vulnerable, a little unsure of yourself, because you can feel that something is in the process of change. So it's probably not a good idea to really commit yourself to anything this weekend, because you would be committing yourself based on a set of assumptions that may not hold true, say, next week. So it would be a very short-term decision to commit yourself, and by next week you may realize that you've made the wrong decision. So just accept the fluidity of the time in which you are living this weekend, and at the same time, see what other people have got to say. Don't lose touch with your friends, colleagues, partners. See what they've got to say. They may not have much to say. Or if they do have something to say, it may not be of any consequence. But it's still a good idea to listen and to try to sort of understand what's going on, try to understand what they are saying. And you also need to consider the possibility that there is a set of interactions with another person that is about to finish. You and someone else, it could be at whatever level, someone you've been dealing with recently, one particular stage of the relationship may be coming to an end. I mean, it may be, but we're dealing with someone who is about to move out of your life. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Just, you've had work to do with another person. And now this person, you understand this person, you've got what you needed to get, and now things are moving on. But maybe there's still something that needs to be sorted out, and maybe this weekend might be a last chance, which is another reason why you should try to do some gentle socializing. At first, you might not really be in the mood, particularly early on Saturday. You might find other people quite disappointing. But just if you keep ploughing through, then it should be okay. It's just I just think it's important not to have expectations. Now, continuing on the theme of other people, I suppose one can't avoid the fact that there is a conjunction between Venus and Pluto in your opposite sign of Aquarius. That could affect you, and it may occur to you that there are certain people out there who are really very set in their ways. They want things done in one particular way. They have very clear ideas, and they're really not prepared to compromise. And so what do you do about the situation? I don't think it's a situation that you can ignore, but don't jump to conclusions. Just because someone is really set in their ways and refuses to budge, doesn't mean it's always going to be like that. So I think you shouldn't rush into making conclusions, making decisions about someone, or indeed a situation that seems to be very fixed, where there's a sort of a deadlock. No one's prepared to compromise. No one's prepared to consider other ideas. It's a temporary situation, and it may be, when the sun moves into Pisces next week, that is going to create a bit more flexibility in the universe. And so maybe as the sun moves into Pisces, that's going to help things sort of start to move. It's going to unlock things. So don't give up on a person or a situation that seems to be completely stuck, because I think it may start to move a bit as you move into next week. So I think that's kind of given you an idea about relationships. I mean, there are several things going on in relationships. Your relationships with, other people on lots of different levels. Some people are quitting, exiting the scene. Other people are staying on the scene, but they don't seem to be in the mood for change. There is an inflexibility there, but as I've suggested, this inflexibility might be quite temporary. Finally, I should probably say something about your work, if you're working. I know it's a weekend, but I think if you are working, if you do have a job, that is going to be of concern to you. Even if you're not working this weekend, I think you're going to be thinking about it quite a lot, even ruminating about it. You may be thinking hard about certain people you have to deal with at work who kind of annoy you, who are making life a misery for you, who are blocking your progress. I mean, that is one possibility. And I think you're going to be aware that the way things are set up at the moment, it might feel that your progress is dependent on things outside your control. And that might bother you. And that's just going to be something you perhaps need to work through over the weekend. So that would be certainly the case if you are not working over the weekend. And I suppose most people don't work over the weekend. Is that right? I don't know. Although I suppose with the recession and not, is there a recession? Well, it depends where you are. I think Britain has just gone into recession. But money's short. People often have to do several jobs. People are working over the weekend very often. So if you are a Leo working over the weekend, then you may feel that some of the situations you have to deal with are a bit difficult. Dealing with people who just don't want to change. What's the best approach? The best approach is to just observe and learn. Just because someone is refusing to budge doesn't mean to say that they're not giving you useful information. Virgo, you're in not well. What about Virgo? It's a mixed picture. On one hand, the moon is moving through Gemini. And so from a Virgo perspective, that means that you're quite keen to be seen and heard, especially if you're involved in sort of career and business. You want to make things happen. That's going to be important to you. But there is the question is, are you actually going to be able to make anything happen? I think there are going to be certain situations which really hold you back, especially at the beginning of a weekend, perhaps early on Saturday. There might be something you really want to do, but you're held back. Just someone's behavior, someone changes their plans, someone raises objections, and it's kind of annoying. And matters aren't helped by the fact that Mercury, which is your ruling planet, is conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So with Mercury on a Mars-Saturn midpoint, yes, Virgos could start to develop a very negative view of the world. You may be seeing all the things you have to do to get where you want to go, and it may just all seem rather difficult, and you may have quite a negative view of of other people, and even yourself. And when you talk to people, you may notice that they are very keen to discuss their own problems and issues, and at first that might not be what you want to hear, but in a way that's good. If there's something about you that encourages people to discuss what's on their mind, then in a way you are helping to move things on. Virgos do have a reputation as being healers. I mean, the sign Virgo is often connected with health, and so by listening to people's problems, you may come up with some ideas. You may be able to go some way towards dealing with these problems. It really is possible, and as Saturday changes to Sunday, as your social skills improve, there is a moon. The moon is making a trine to Mercury, so Mercury is not just on the Mars-Saturn midpoint, but it's also making this trine to Mercury, and Mercury is making a square to Uranus. So in fact, Virgo, your ruler, Mercury, there's a lot going on with it. And it's not just about Mercury being on the Mars-Saturn midpoint and perhaps having some negativity about that. Yeah, you might feel negative, but it's a question is, how do you work with this negativity? And with Mercury square Uranus, it could be a bit difficult, this Mercury square Uranus. There's a challenge here with Mercury square Uranus. The challenge is to see the world in a different way. I think what you have to do. I think it was Proust. I once tried to read some Proust. It's really difficult, but I didn't really get very far with Marcel Proust. But one thing I remember him saying, he talked about changing your eyes. By that I mean, we think that if we want change in our lives, we have to perhaps go somewhere different, go to the other side of the world. And what Marcel Proust said is that what you actually have to do, one of the characters in his novel, what was it, Swan's Way, talked about changing your eyes. That's all you have to do, change your eyes. If you can change your eyes, the world becomes completely different. that's what you do. You don't need to go to the other side to get a plane ticket. Just change your eyes. You don't have to move anywhere. And so perhaps that's what you have to do, Virgo, this weekend, is change your eyes. Start to see the world in a different way. And once you've done that, you'll see that things really have changed, that things really are different, and you'll start to see what is possible rather than what is not possible. You'll start to see possibilities rather than restrictions. So that is a challenge for you, and I think that is what the Mercury square Uranus is about. Uranus is in Taurus. It's about, for you, it's about seeing the big picture. It's about having an expansive view of the world, not just looking at the tiny little problems. So I think that is something you need to focus on. And that Mercury square Uranus may even suggest that you need to have, a more spiritual way of looking at it. It's not just you and your material existence and your lifespan. It's about something bigger than yourself, and by finding something bigger than yourself, you find, you can find purpose. But a change of vision can change everything. Libra, you are quite serious today, Libra, because Venus is your ruling planet, and Venus is conjunct Pluto. But I don't mean serious necessarily in a bad way. It's actually serious in quite a focused way. You're very focused on what you want. You're very focused on what you can do, and how you can be creative. Creativity really does matter, particularly now. We've got 5 planets in Aquarius: Sun, Mercury, Mars, Venus, Neptune. It's all there, and from a Libran perspective, the sign Aquarius is about creativity, and it's about the kind of creativity that is different, that makes you special. It's not the kind of creativity that you need to, ask people, is that okay? Will you mind if I do that? No, you've got to be selfishly creative. And really, that's what this weekend is all about. And there is a lot of action that you can really take advantage of, and you're helped by the fact that the moon is moving through Gemini, because you've got Aquarius is an air sign, you've got Gemini is an air sign, the moon is moving through Gemini, and of course Libra. Your stars, it depends how you're reading these forecasts, whether you're reading it from your star sign, moon sign, ascendant sign. It's kind of up to you. Your sign, Libra, is an air sign. So this gives you a lot of energy, and it allows you to be yourself, and perhaps to discover who you really are. And that can sometimes be tough for Librans. Libra, the symbol for Libra is balance. And if you're not careful, you can spend all your time trying to balance to what's going on in the outside world. And then you keep balancing. You keep having to change the way you respond. And in the process, you might just forget who you are. And so that's the problem. And that's not something you should be doing this weekend. You've got to forget about the balance. You've got to start thinking about who you are, what you can do, and what you enjoy. And that's certainly something that you really can do. And you're going to be very serious about it, or you should be very serious about it, because Venus is making a conjunction to Pluto. I think that this, as I said, I think this conjunction to Pluto is fortunate. It's not just making conjunction to Pluto. Venus is conjunct the Mars-Pluto midpoint. The word obsession often has negative connotations. I think for you it should not have negative connotations, because obsession is kind of the opposite of balance. Obsession is about commitment to an idea. It's about commitment to a way of life. It's about commitment to it's about a commitment to yourself. And I think that's what you really need to focus on, having a complete commitment to yourself and to, what makes you special. And that includes a commitment to your fundamental creativity. And other people should play no part in it, unless they are playing a supportive part, a constructive part. You certainly shouldn't try to explain what you're doing. So I think that's how you go about the weekend, then you can get a sort of a real sense of excitement. And on Sunday, the moon makes a trine to Mercury. So at that stage, things are starting to move. You're really beginning to understand why you're doing what you're doing. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, it is worth noting that on Sunday, Venus is making a decile aspect to Saturn. So Venus is 36 degrees from Saturn. And that's going to say something about the kind of style that you feel is appropriate. And a Venus-Saturn style is a style that is a bit cold and aloof. Is not emotionally all over the place. It's running a tight emotional ship. Now, that might not sound very nice, but it may be, for you on Sunday, absolutely right. Because, you can't spend all your time worrying about pleasing other people. You've got things to do. And so if you want to get things done, and if you want to not have people interfering in your life, you maybe have to create a cold front, a slightly detached, disinterested front, because that prevents people getting too close, and it prevents people from messing with your life. It prevents them interfering. So that might be not such a bad thing to do. Now, from a Libran perspective, that might not sound very nice, but that might be, it might be the right thing to do. Scorpio, you're a little bit distracted, I suppose. You feel that you and the rest of the world are going in different directions. You kind of find it also perhaps difficult to commit to anything that is beyond your immediate sphere of interest. So you have your sphere of interest, very focused. I've been talking about this over the last few days. But when it comes to things outside your sphere of interest, when it comes to things that you're not directly interested in, you're not really there. You're just you're not. You don't really want to engage. You might feel you have to engage, but you don't really want to engage. So I think in order to give everyone a nice weekend, to make sure you don't spoil things for yourself or to spoil things for other people, I think you just need to accept that. Because nothing's worse than someone being half engaged, giving half commitments. People will say, okay, yeah, Scorpio says they'll do that, but Scorpio doesn't really care. So consider the things that are really important to you. Sure, put your energy into it. That's great. But things that aren't important to you, things that aren't a matter of life and death and existential crucialness, should possibly be ignored. And don't be afraid to tell people that you're not interested, or that right now you're not interested, come back next week. Because I think that's the kind of mood that you're in. And I think that you look at the world out there and you regard it as being perhaps hostile, perhaps boring. It's just not something you want to. It's just not something you want to involve yourself with. That's it. So really, in some respects, that is all there is to be said. I think in terms of relationships, I suppose we have to say that Venus is your relationship ruler, because Venus rules Taurus, your opposite sign, and Venus is conjunct Pluto. And so, if there is anything to be said, I suppose you do have to. I suppose you have to consider the people close to you, given the fact that you have this general disinterest in anything that is outside your immediate zone of control. Some of the people closest to you are quite stubborn. They're focused on their particular way of viewing things. And how does that relate to you? I think you have to try to understand, because with that Venus conjunct Pluto, there is a certain danger that you and someone else have a complete misunderstanding, which starts as disinterest. So you're disinterested with what someone is saying or doing, even if this person is of interest to you. But you have this disinterest. You don't really notice what they're doing. You don't really notice what they're saying. And then at some stage, you think, hold on, they've done this and they've done that, and that affects me. And then, hold on, there's a problem here. So I think, Scorpio, if someone is important to you, if someone, for example, shares your living space, and their actions and decisions affect you, I think you need to watch what they're doing all weekend and take an interest in their plans. Listen. You might not want to listen, but I would suggest that you do listen. Because if you don't listen, you might suddenly find yourself in a situation that you really weren't expecting, that you hadn't got any plans for, and it does affect you, and there could be big problems there. So I think that would be what I'd say about this weekend. You can't completely shut yourself off in your zone of control. That little part of the world where you are in control, the part of the world that you are interested in. A few things outside that world can affect you, and then you therefore do have to show an interest. Sagittarius. The moon continues moving through Sagittarius. Sorry, the moon continues moving through Gemini, which is your opposite sign. And it's moving through Gemini pretty much the whole weekend. So that does mean that other people can't be avoided. You're aware that what's going on out there impacts you. But you do have to consider you know, what these people are like and whether they're being helpful. Some people are completely unhelpful, and they may uh, destroy the atmosphere with their negativity. Reason I'm saying that is because you know Gemini is Gemini is your opposite sign. The ruler of Gemini is Mercury, and Mercury is conjunct the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there are some people who have a very negative and very unhelpful view of the world. And in many cases, these people should be avoided. Unless you think you can do something about it. If someone feels negative about themselves, maybe they need a bit of Sagittarian optimism to help them out. Maybe you can show them a different view of the world. So that is something you could do, but some people are just so negative that they don't want to listen. They'll just argue back, and there's just nothing you can do about it. So you have to consider with people what you can do and what can be achieved. Now, Mercury also has a connection with your work and your career. After all, Mercury rules Virgo. Virgo in the Sagittarian horoscope is quite a high-profile sign. So this might mean that you are looking at your way forward. You're looking at career, what you're trying to do with your life, and you yourself might feel a certain amount of negativity. That's because Mercury is on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. You might feel that things are not right, and you may be wondering if something is coming to an end, some aspect of your working life is coming to an end. And when Sagittarians see something like that, it can affect them in a big way. And now you have to work out: are you being just overly negative? So, did something difficult or problematic happen last week, and you're just hanging on to it, and it's actually not a big deal, and you're just brooding for no reason at all? That is quite possible. Alternatively, Sagittarius, there may actually be something quite important that is going on that needs to be addressed. It's not a situation that is definitely going to turn out badly, but it could turn out badly. And so perhaps this weekend you need to create a plan of action. And a plan of action that may involve communication, talking to people. So if something bothers you regarding some external interest, like your career or your work, don't just brood. You need to talk. There are people you need to talk to. Don't be afraid of getting advice, especially on Sunday when the moon makes a trine to Mercury, because I think you can get some very good advice, and in the process of getting good advice, you can give good advice. So I think for Sagittarians, consider who's giving you advice, because people can really help each other. But what you mustn't do is allow people to go into a spiral of negativity. That mustn't be you, and that mustn't be the people you're dealing with, because you can't really tolerate that. You shouldn't tolerate that, because I'm afraid some people do have quite a negative view of the world, and so that's something you can perhaps work on. One final point I should make is there might be a surprise in terms of what someone says. Reason being that Mercury is making a square to Uranus. Mercury is connected with other people and how they communicate, what they're saying. So Mercury square Uranus would indicate that you shouldn't have expectations about anyone. You shouldn't have expectations about any plans you have involving other people, because people can do things that are very unexpected with Mercury square Uranus. And in particular, plans could be completely disrupted. So if you've got plans this weekend, particularly fixed plans, particularly plans involving other people turning up or not turning up, these plans could be wrecked, or they could have to be radically changed. So don't have fixed ideas about how this weekend is going to pan out. You yourself might have everything under control, but you can't plan for you can't plan for other people, because they are a law unto themselves. I mean, you knew that anyway, Sagittarius, but perhaps this weekend you need to be reminded of that. Capricorn, you want things done in a particular way, and that's okay. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that, and I think by and large you won't be disappointed. If you expect people to behave in a particular way, I think they will, provided you give them some room. You don't want to be too controlling. In a way, the more controlling you are, the more vulnerable you are to surprises. If you give people a fair amount of freedom, then I don't think that you're going to be disappointed. So that's probably how you need to handle the weekend. And I think that there seem to be actually two things that need to be done this weekend. In terms of what your plans are. So if you look at what you want to achieve, two things need to be achieved. I'm not telling you what they are. You know what they are. And to begin with, it might seem difficult. I think probably early Saturday, you might find one or two people really irritating. Maybe they just don't want to play it your way. But you need to be relaxed about it. Let these people get used to the situation. Be tolerant. Maybe you don't need anyone's help to achieve your aims. So these two things that need to be done. Do you really need any help? You probably don't. Indeed, the more help you feel you require, the more likely it is that things could be disrupted. Though I suspect there is work to be done in terms of money. I think money is going to be really important. I mean, not least because there are 5 planets in Aquarius. Aquarius is a sign following Capricorn, and I talked about money yesterday, and the theme continues. But you need to look at money perhaps in a different way with all this stuff in Aquarius. Aquarius is quite a visionary sign, and it's quite sort of detached from the rest of the world. Perhaps you need to think about new ways of handling your money, ways which they may not be revolutionary, but they they require some forward thinking. The old ways were fine, but perhaps a bit of a change is required there. So that's probably the main thing going on. I'm really not saying it's going to be a particularly exciting weekend. I really don't think it is. I don't think you want it to be an exciting weekend. If things happen that you weren't planning on, then you may not respond very well, especially if there is a financial dimension. If you hear news of a financial nature that you weren't expecting, or you find that something needs to be purchased that you weren't expecting, then you could get really annoyed and flustered. So you mustn't sort of panic, and you mustn't assume that there's only one way of responding. So if you hear that money needs to be spent, if you find out something about your finances and your financial planning that you weren't expecting, the first inclination will be to panic, to sort of say, well, what do I do? How do I make changes? Looks really difficult. It's important to be relaxed about it, and also I think to be fairly creative, and in that way you can take control of the situation, and overall you are really in control of the situation. It may not feel like you're in control this weekend, but really you are in control, and in the end people are going to respect you, because you have an understanding of what's going on that other people just don't have, and you can set yourself up as quite an authority, quite as something of an authority figure. So that's certainly something you can do. Finally, I should point out that Venus is making a decile to Saturn. Saturn is your ruling planet. Now, this decile between Venus and Saturn may have some impact on relationships, because Venus is a sort of planet which is universally connected with relationships. So with Venus decile Saturn, I think you can make the effort to be nice. Now, normally with Venus decile Saturn is, you see it in terms of perhaps making the effort to be sort of cold and to be detached. But I'm talking about you, Capricorn, and your ruling planet. And Saturn is your ruling planet, and it's decile Saturn. It's decile Venus. So you're trying to bring Venus in. You're trying to make yourself a more pleasant and approachable person. It doesn't come naturally. At least this weekend it doesn't come naturally. But through your conscious efforts, you can turn yourself into a pleasant, approachable and even lovable person. It might all seem a bit fake, but don't worry about that. It'll all come together. And so through your efforts, particularly on Sunday, you can make yourself quite popular, and people are going to like you because of your efforts. So it really is worth putting the work in. Aquarius. Well, right now there is a real build-up in your in your star sign. 5 planets are in Aquarius. And that's as good as it gets, because on Monday, even late on Sunday, depending on where you are, the sun moves out of Aquarius and into Pisces. So the Aquarius season is actually coming to an end. It's always the case, isn't it? At the point of maximum Aquarius, peak Aquarius, is the very point where Aquarius starts to fade. I don't mean that in a negative way, by the way. But what I'm kind of saying is, this is as good as it gets as far as the Aquarian energy is concerned. So perhaps you should make the most of it this weekend. Take all the aspects of Aquarius which are so important to you, which are currently current in the world, which are currently, which is very much part of the world we're living in, and use them. Like, your originality does matter. You're able to be original because you're able to detach yourself from other people and their petty concerns, and you're able to think for yourself. And you certainly don't want to compromise this weekend. You want to consider, what is it that you really want? What conclusions have you come to over the last few weeks? Because I think you've come to some very important conclusions about action, about what you want to do in the future, how best to use your talents. Don't be put off. And as it is peak Aquarius, now having built it all up, you've now got to scatter it, and so you've got to start putting things into action. When the sun moves into Pisces, that's like, Pisces is the sea. It's taking all these things you built up and sort of throwing them into the sea, so they get everywhere. So that is something you really need to do. I think you're helped by the fact that this weekend the moon continues to move through Gemini. So Gemini is an air sign, and Aquarius is an air sign, and you're in a position where you can be uncompromisingly creative. Just don't be afraid. You can use your creativity to really make things happen, and also you can force people to question some of their assumptions. I think it has to be done. So if you're dealing with people who just have made assumptions about the world, maybe they've made assumptions about you, you can now say things and do things which wreck these assumptions. Now, you do have to consider what the response is going to be. I mean, very often when you get people to question their assumptions, they can get annoyed. That does happen very often. But in this situation, maybe you need to take the risk. Because, as I said, it's a kind of a now or never weekend, because it doesn't get more Aquarius than it does now, and certainly if people have been making assumptions about you, then those assumptions need to be overthrown, I would have said, and I think that your single-mindedness is certainly going to help move things along. It's not just the fact that Mercury is making a rather wild aspect to Uranus. It's the fact that because Mercury is moving through Aquarius, your star sign, it's making a square to Uranus, and Uranus is a planet of revolutions, Mercury is a planet of communication, so hence you can force people to question their assumptions. Also, there is a conjunction between Venus and Pluto in your star sign. that says something about how you relate to other people. Venus and Pluto is actually a very powerful and charismatic conjunction. There's something about you, Aquarius, that is compelling. When people meet you, they realize there's something about you that's special, that they can't get out of their mind, and that does give you a position of great power. Venus, by the way, is not just sort of conjunct Pluto. Venus is on the Mars-Pluto midpoint. So you can make things happen. You can persuade people. You're very persuasive this weekend. And your persuasiveness is all about your single-mindedness. You know what you want fundamentally. And you're not prepared to compromise. And, that's what other people want. Other people don't like uncertainty, really. They want to know what's going to happen. And so having your certainty around, having your complete confidence in yourself and your vision of the world it's what people want. I think you will be very compelling. That does give you a certain amount of responsibility, especially if you're dealing with people in a sort of one-to-one sense. You're the one with the power. You're the one with the control. So you do have to consider that. If you're a bad actor, and I'm not saying you are a bad actor, I'm sure you're not a bad actor, but if you were to be a bad actor, then yes, you would be able to cause a lot of damage. But I'm sure you want the best for everyone. You want the best for the world, and of course you want the best for yourself. And through the strength of your character, you can certainly get it. Pisces, wait for it, Pisces. The sun is about to enter your star sign, but not quite. The sun enters your star sign on Monday. Okay, unless you're in the Americas, then okay, Sunday evening. For example, I think at 11:13 p.m. on Sunday, the sun goes into your star sign. But really, for most of the weekend, the sun is moving through, or probably perhaps all the weekend, the sun is moving through the last degree or two of Aquarius. And so it's perhaps a time when you're preparing yourself, when you're not quite ready to take the initiative, you're not quite ready to take action, but you're getting ready. You're on the starting blocks. But if you act too early, you could spoil things. And I know I know there are things you want to do. You want to. I think you want to stir things up. I think you'd quite like to stir things up. But if you do try to assert yourself this weekend, you might actually be disappointed. You might just find that the world in which you're trying to assert yourself is just really stuck. Things aren't actually moving, and that could be very discouraging. People are not really in the mood for action. There's going to be a lot of delay. You might not see the delays until you actually start to interact with the world and trying to make things happen. Then you'll start to see how delayed things really are. So that goes back to my theme. You've got to be patient, and even with with your family in your home, on Saturday, the moon is sort of making a square aspect to Saturn, and that could hold things up. In fact, you could hold things up on Saturday. I mean, I think you have, you have clear ideas about the way things should be at home, particularly now when Saturn is moving through Pisces, your star sign. You certainly have clear ideas. And those clear ideas, that clarity, is going to have perhaps this weekend a negative impact on your family. They might not feel that they can really express themselves because of the way you are. And that is the way you are. You have a clear set of views about the world and the way it should be, and that's that is as far as that's how it goes. Now, there is a question of how other people respond to you, how the world responds to you. Virgo is your opposite sign, and the ruler of Virgo is Mercury. And this weekend, Mercury is square Uranus. And you might find that there are some people around you who perhaps should know better, who are behaving in a fairly chaotic and irresponsible way. Through their actions, they could really mess things around for you. And you might think you've got everything under control, but someone represented by that Mercury square Uranus could just interfere, do something you weren't expecting, and you might find that all your plans have to be started again from scratch. Fortunately, you are in a position, especially on Sunday, where you are able to communicate. And I think that Sunday communication is going to be important, particularly if you're faced with a situation that you don't like. So something upsets you, or something bothers you, or has been bothering you, then on Sunday, with the moon trine Mercury, you can make your feelings clear. And you can make your feelings clear without having to have a big argument about it. I think if on Saturday you were to try to make your feelings clear and tell someone what you thought, you might get a negative response. On Sunday, I think the situation is going to be easier, and it'll be much easier to talk to people and get a reasonable response out of them. But I'm sorry to be a little negative in terms of my view of this weekend, but cheer up. Sun is about to move into Pisces very soon. Monday it's moving into Pisces. Sun is in Pisces. Sun is moving into your star sign. It's your birthday season. Indeed, if you're in New York, or late on Sunday, your birthday season starts. That's right, at 11:13 p.m. Maybe you would have gone to bed by then. But anyway, things are certainly going to looking up for you. Just this weekend, maybe not something to write home about. Now I'm going to look at the I Ching, and so I asked the question: what is this weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? As usual, I threw 3 coins in the air 6 times, and the first hexagram I got was hexagram 46, pushing upwards. So by and large, this is a reasonably fortunate hexagram. It's about progress. There are things we can do. We don't just have to hang around doing nothing. Um, we could, yeah, we can make solid progress. And I think to begin with, we may feel that our progress, we're actually able to make very good progress, fast progress. So if there's something we really want to make progress with some particular area of our life that we want to get going on, then yes, we can really start covering a lot of ground. But the third line moves, third line from the bottom moves, and what this is the I Ching says, certainly the Wilhelm translation, is pushing upwards into an empty city. So that gives us the image of we're making progress. I mean, I suppose you might regard it as like making a tunnel, and then we move upwards, and we think, we've arrived. What's there? Nothing. We've kind of arrived in the wrong place. We get what we want, and when having got what we want, we realize that we haven't achieved anything. That might be what happens to begin with. It also might be the case if we are working with another person, particularly if we are working in a job or we're working for someone. The people we are working with, perhaps we're pushing upwards for someone. We're doing someone else's work, whether we're doing it out of love or we're being paid, whatever. We're doing someone else's work, and it's been suggested we do something for someone, and we do the work, and we realize it's a waste of time because the person we're doing the work for doesn't know what they're doing. Perhaps they misdirected us, perhaps because of who they are, it's just a waste of time. Now, that sounds quite negative, but there is another moving line, the fourth line moving line, which talks about being successful, and getting recognized for our success. So it may be that a first attempt at something doesn't work, but a second attempt does work. Or maybe we need to consider that first attempt and realize we're wasting our time. We're realizing that the person who's giving us instructions doesn't know what they're talking about. Realize that we're putting too much energy in the wrong area, and then changing our focus. And once we've changed our focus, we'll be doing the real work, not the fake work, but the real work. So we do need to work out what we're doing. We can't just push upwards in a chaotic way, because we won't get anywhere. We need to make sure that we've thought it through. Where are we going? If we haven't thought it through, if we don't know where we're going, then we might be disappointed. So because we've got two moving lines, this hexagram changes. And perhaps this hexagram relates more to Sunday. And this hexagram is deliverance. So the work we were doing perhaps on Saturday, that pushing upwards I was talking about, there is a certain sense in which we were connected with something or someone that wasn't perhaps doing us any good. We were sort of getting instructions from the wrong place, perhaps involved with the wrong people. We weren't able to achieve our best because of the external environment. But now we get deliverance, and deliverance is about freeing ourselves from a difficult situation. So we're in a difficult situation. We've been wondering how we're going to get out of it, and with this hexagram, we can get out of it. We can leave. So if there's a situation where you're not happy about it, but you feel you can't get out of it. Maybe because you've made promises. You don't want to let someone down. With this hexagram 40, you don't be tied by your promises and your commitments. Not if you're miserable, not if you're unhappy, not if you feel not if you have this sort of dread feeling that if you keep on going in this direction, something bad is going to happen. Well, actually, you have a chance to get off. That's what deliverance is about. And there'll be this great sense of relief. Okay, you might get criticized, you might be accused of being disloyal, but you freed yourself from a really difficult situation, and you've dodged a bullet. So consider that, because that might be something going on Sunday. Maybe it's a decision you make on Sunday. You're thinking about what you should do about a commitment that you know is going to go wrong, but you feel that you can't get out of it. But with 40, it's saying it's okay. You just leave. It doesn't matter if you cause offence. Okay, if you've got a legal commitment, then that's kind of different matter. But this is a kind of commitment where you can just leave, and it's perhaps, I think, more of a sort of a concern about what the response is. You don't want to upset someone, so you'll stick with this disastrous course of action. But no, deliverance means that there is a clear exit. Now I'm going to go back to the astrology, and I'm going to start by briefly looking at Prince Andrew's chart. I'm really not going to spend long on it. I don't think I've got anything particularly useful to say about his chart, but it is his birthday. Monday's his birthday. He's going to be 64 years old. And so Prince Andrew has had his problems, hasn't he? And these problems, perhaps, these problems do continue. So this is his chart. There's his sun in the 8th house. He's got sun opposition Pluto. Now, I suppose that Pluto in the 2nd house, that's perhaps something I want to mention. There is one commentator who said I don't talk enough about houses. So Pluto in the 2nd house. I mean, Andrew has got into trouble in a way because of money, hasn't he? I mean, that's part of the problem. I don't know how Andrew has all these issues with money, but with Jeffrey Epstein, I think there seems to have been a sort of a financial dimension to his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. I think, was he looking for, I mean, he seemed to need money, Andrew. I don't know, does he have an expensive lifestyle? Didn't he have this chalet in Switzerland? But with that Pluto in Virgo, he does seem to be quite obsessed about money. That would be standard way of doing it. Pluto in Virgo in the 2nd house, obsessed about money. That's one way of looking at it. Now, very soon there is a full moon, I believe, or is it? Well, let's see. I've kind of lost track with these full moons. Yes, that's right, February the 24th this week, which is very close. It's not this week. When is February the 24th? It's quite soon, February the 24th. There is going to be a full moon. February the 24th sees a full moon at 5 Virgo. So there's a full moon right across his Pluto. Now, normally, I wouldn't take that too seriously because Pluto is a collective planet. Loads of people have Pluto in Virgo. I mean, my Pluto is at 7 degrees 33 minutes Virgo. even though I was born over 2 years after Prince Andrew, my Pluto is pretty much in the same position as Andrew's Pluto. So, in a way, the full moon on February the 24th is going to affect me almost as much as it is Andrew. But the full moon is, firstly, I would say the full moon is quite exact. It's quite close in terms of Andrew's Pluto. Where was it? 520. It's at 523. So it's less than half a degree away from his Pluto. That's the first point. Secondly, Andrew is an important person. What happens to Andrew? People notice it. It gets reported in the news. I know some people might disagree with that, but I do think the more important you are, the more public attention you get, the more you are your public property. And so collective planets like Pluto might become more influential, and so I would have said, given he's got Pluto opposition Sun, this full moon on his Pluto may have quite a big impact on his finances. There might be a realization about money that he has to deal with, and it does hit that that eighth house. Eighth house is about Sun opposition Pluto. Eighth house, okay, you could say eighth house is about sex and how his sex life has, or alleged sex life, has caused him so much damage to his reputation. But the Sun is also about complicated money, and I think perhaps with Jeffrey Epstein, we saw with it was a very eighth house thing, wasn't it, with Jeffrey Epstein, and of course Jeffrey Epstein was a Pisces, like Andrew. Sorry, Jeffrey Epstein was not a Pisces, but Jeffrey Epstein was on the cusp of Capricorn and Aquarius, but Jeffrey Epstein has a Venus-Mars conjunction in Pisces. So Jeffrey Epstein's Venus-Mars conjunction was that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because Jeffrey Epstein has a Venus-Mars conjunction at 1650. See, Venus is at 1655 Pisces, Mars is at 1601 Pisces. So that conjunction really hits Andrew's Mercury, and so Andrew's Mercury in Pisces is not a it's not a very well placed Mercury, is it? I mean, it's Mercury rules Virgo, so Mercury in Pisces is poorly placed, and then you've got Jeffrey Epstein's Venus Mars on that Mercury. I mean, he would have really taken Prince Andrew to the cleaner. Prince Andrew just couldn't get enough of Jeffrey Epstein. And also look at how Prince Andrew has his South Node at 24 Pisces. So Jeffrey Epstein's Venus-Mars conjunction in Pisces was on Prince Andrew's South Node. So really, Jeffrey Epstein was a complete disaster for Prince Andrew. But yeah, the money thing with this Pluto hitting. The full moon hitting Prince Andrew's Pluto, there might be some serious realizations here that Andrew has to deal with, and he just sees his finances for really what they are. Now, Andrew's solar return, because Monday is his birthday, so that means that Prince Andrew has a solar return when the sun returns to where it was when he was born. This is his solar return. So there's the sun sun is at 0 degrees Pisces. So he's just had his Saturn. Saturn was conjunct his sun, but now Saturn is sort of 8 degrees apart. Still, when you look at a solar return, you do notice that still, the Sun and Saturn are 8 degrees apart. So maybe from a symbolic point of view, 8 months on, something difficult might happen, because if you take 8 degrees between the Sun and Saturn, then 8, 9 months later, so that would be, the autumn, there might be some difficulties for Andrew. And, remember, Saturn is still moving through Pisces, and Andrew has Sun, Mercury, South Node in Pisces, so you can see the potential damage that Saturn could cause. Interesting here is that the Moon is exactly on the IC, exactly on the descendant in Andrew's chart. See, Moon is at 0 degrees 27 Cancer. What does that mean? Is he going to remarry Sarah Ferguson? I suppose that's a possibility, Moon in Cancer. Or is it some new enemy? But remember, the 7th house represents one's enemies. That is a possibility. But the Moon is in Cancer. Maybe the moon in Cancer is, I don't know. Maybe it's not so bad for Andrew. One other positive thing about Andrew, and I know one's not supposed to be positive about Andrew, before I move on to Karen Silkwood, is so he's going to be 60. He's going to be 64. His next birthday. On Monday, he's going to be 64. So you could say, okay, if you take annual profections and year rulers, that means that you move for one sign represents 1 year of life, and it repeats every 12 years. So that's his 60th birthday, covered by Leo, 61st birthday, covered by Virgo, 62nd birthday, covered by Libra, 63rd birthday, what he just the previous year, was covered by Scorpio. And you can see that it would have been a difficult year for him, the year he's just coming out of, because he's got Moon in Scorpio and Neptune in Scorpio, particularly that Moon in Scorpio. So yeah, that was a really difficult, introspective, brooding year where a lot of things didn't go right. But the year he's coming into now is covered by Sagittarius, and he does have Jupiter in Sagittarius. So I know everyone wants to write off Prince Andrew, and obviously he is written off in terms of any respect for what anyone might have. But you know what? It might actually be a better year for him, because he's got Jupiter in Sagittarius. And so maybe it won't be such a bad year. And maybe that Moon in Cancer on his solar return chart, almost exactly on his descendant, maybe things aren't so bad for him. But I have spent far too long on Prince Andrew, much longer than I wanted to spend on him. And I now want to turn to the horoscope of Karen Silkwood. So Karen Silkwood, she was this nuclear worker. I mean, I think she sort of had some training in chemistry and science, and she got a job with this Carnegie plant in Oklahoma. I think she started working for them in 1972. And she found out that things were going wrong at this plant, that they were cutting corners, people were getting exposed to radiation, or rather to plutonium, and she got involved with the union, and that would have required a certain amount of courage. People say, but this is a woman becoming a union leader in this factory, and she was really a whistleblower. She was giving evidence to, I think, the Atomic Energy Commission, and she was, according to one view, she was about to have a meeting with a New York Times journalist, and she didn't make that meeting, and her car was found at 5 minutes past 8 in the evening on November the 13th. 1974, and yeah, she was dead. We don't know, did she just die in an accident? But the sheaf of papers she had wasn't there. There was evidence that someone had rear-ended her, but who? And yeah, she was young. She was. She wasn't. She died in. She was. She. I think she was. If she died in 74, she was only. She was only 28 when this happened. Now, if you look at her chart, I think we see a lot of stuff going on here. Firstly, I've been talking about Chiron a lot. She has Chiron rising. You can see that Chiron at 21.5 Libra, and it's for her. Chiron is actually exactly square her midheaven. It's not the fact that Chiron is a bit off her ascendant, but it's exactly square her midheaven. And Saturn is exactly square her ascendant. So she was born with a Mars-Saturn conjunction on the midheaven, fairly close to the midheaven, at least certainly if you use whole sign houses, that Mars-Saturn conjunction is in the 10th house. And that Saturn was linked with Chiron. Now, the fact that she was in her job, she got contaminated with plutonium, quite possibly deliberately contaminated at some of the contamination incidents. By the way, there's of course a famous film about her. I think she was played by Meryl Streep, and people talk about the famous Shah sequence, not the Psycho Shah sequence, but the Shah sequence in the film is when she goes through this radiation monitoring thing, and she gets off, and she gets dragged away and thrown into a shower, and they scrub her, try to get rid of all the contamination. I don't know whether that happened in real life, but I suppose that's what does happen when you get contaminated. So the work she decided to get involved in, Mars Saturn in the 10th house. I mean, that's pretty Mars Saturn in terms of her job, and with Saturn on the midheaven, she certainly takes her job seriously, and the Chiron square midheaven. We've had this sort of discussion about what Chiron actually means. Is it a maverick? That was a view when Chiron was discovered, and a lot of early astrologers, when they first started working with Chiron, did suggest that it might be a maverick. I think, not least because Chiron has a very unusual orbit, because Chiron is a comet and a minor planet. So that's one view. It's also the wounded healer. Now, Karen Silkwood, you could say, really was a wounded healer, because she was contaminated with plutonium. She was trying to make things better for nuclear workers through her role as in the union, and she wasn't just wounded. With Chiron, it's a wound you can't get over. And of course, just before she died, she went to Los Alamos to be to have her to find out how much radiation her body was bearing. And it was okay. She was told it wasn't too bad; it was fine. She'd be able to have children, all that kind of stuff. But radiation from ingested plutonium is, of course, that's a heat like Chiron. Chiron could not be healed. You can't be healed from breathing in plutonium. Not really. It's going to be there. Maybe it won't give you cancer. Maybe it will give you cancer. It depends. So Chiron exactly square the midheaven. I do think that really does fit she would be the wounded healer, but she's also a maverick, because she made a fuss about it. She got involved with the union. She was a whistleblower. So the wounded healer and the maverick, they're not totally opposed concepts. They are in a way the same concept, and so I think that Karen is working really well, and I know in the past I've been quite dismissive of Chiron, but I think in this chart, I think Chiron is really important to actually understand how her chart works. It's with the Pluto. So there is a question about Pluto. You would expect for someone whose life and career is so associated with plutonium, that you would expect Pluto to be prominent in her horoscope. Now, you could say, if you take Placidus houses, that she's got Pluto in the 10th house. So you say, well, Pluto in the 10th house, someone who works with plutonium. That fits. Of course, that doesn't mean that 1 in 12 people work with plutonium. But you've got a plutonium worker and you see Pluto in the 10th, that fits. Of course, if you were to use whole sign houses, that Pluto would be regarded as being in the 11th house, because you would take the whole of Libra as the first house, the whole of Virgo as the 12th house, the whole of Leo as the 11th house. That is true. So perhaps we need to look at other ways in which she has a connection with plutonium. So here is a chart for the discovery of plutonium, or I believe was it the isolation of plutonium. So this is December the 14th, 1940, 8 p.m. Standard Time in Berkeley, California. Now what I want to focus on is the moon. The moon is at 27.9 Gemini, and Neptune is at 27.38 Virgo. So the moon was at 27 Virgo, moon at 27 Gemini, Neptune at 27 Virgo. So going back to Karen Silkwood's chart, her north node was conjunct plutonium's moon, and it was square plutonium's Neptune. So plutonium was discovered with an exact moon-Neptune square, and that moon was conjunct her north node. So maybe the north node is the way she moves forward with her life. It's her destiny, and so perhaps being conjunct the plutonium moon and square the plutonium Neptune, maybe that fits. Maybe I'm just reading too much into it. But there are other ways in which Pluto is prominent, and that relates to the Sun-Moon midpoint. So her Sun-Moon midpoint is at, if you take, there's her moon, there's her sun. That means that her sun, I think her Sun-Moon midpoint is around 25 Sagittarius. That means that her Pluto is not just in the 10th house, but it's sesquiquadrate, 135-degree aspect to the Sun-Moon midpoint. So it's within less than a degree. So she indeed does have Pluto on the Sun-Moon midpoint. So I would have said there are enough connections there with her chart and Pluto and plutonium to make sense that she was a plutonium worker who she died because of her work. We talked about Pluto, Sun, Moon, midpoint. It can work in different ways. Natalie Wood had Pluto on the Sun, Moon, midpoint, as I was talking about that yesterday. Natalie Wood died in mysterious circumstances. Karen Silkwood died in mysterious circumstances. And I think the Pluto is quite prominent there. Also, if she there's her Mars-Saturn. Her Mars-Saturn midpoint is at around 16, about 16 Cancer. So she's got Sun sesquiquadrate her Mars-Saturn midpoint. So she's got Sun on the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So the sort of concept of death and bad things happening is very much part of her life. And if you're into hypothetical planets, she has Mercury sesquiquadrate Hades. That may not be immediately apparent, but she has got. Let me just show you where Hades is. There's Hades. I wouldn't worry about the fact that it was in the 7th, but the point is that there's Mercury 8:21 Pisces, Hades at 23:14 Aries. So Mercury is what attracts her, what gets her attention. What her Hades is about criminality. And perhaps it's all the sharp practices of her employer when she was working in this plutonium factory. And with Mercury semi-square Hades, she was really aware of it. It really was very clear to her. Perhaps her co-workers didn't notice, but also that goes back to the Chiron. She was the maverick. She was the one who just wasn't going to just follow the crowd. She was going to ask questions. So as far as why she died, when she died, this is her solar return for 1974. You can see that I've set it for where she was born. That's how I do my solar returns. I don't set it for where she was. Although this was Oklahoma, it wasn't. Oklahoma and Texas are pretty much next to each other. I don't think there'd be a huge difference in a solar return. The sun is in the 8th house. So you could say, well, the 8th house is associated with death. Okay, you might say technically from a Placidus point of view, it's in the 7th house, but I think it's changed sign. It's in Pisces. I would regard that as being an 8th house sun rather than a 7th house sun, because it's in Pisces, and certainly by whole signs it's an 8th house sun. And the sun is making a square to Neptune. Now you might say, well, that is quite a wide square to Neptune. Mercury is also square Neptune, but the sun is actually 8.5 degrees short of the square of Neptune. So if you count that, if you count 8.5 degrees, so you go February, March, April, May, June, July, August, September, October, then a half. That would take you to early November, when there's going to be a Sun square Neptune incident, potentially. And of course, she died. She was killed, I think, November the 13th. So that Sun square Neptune completely fits. Also, if you're into fixed stars, Mars conjunct Algol in the 10th house. Algol, the head of the demon, saying something about her work. So I think that solar return fits quite well. Then there's her solar arc directions. This is her solar arc directions for when she was killed. Again, we don't really know how it happened. I'm not saying there's anything too dramatic here, but you can see that solar arc directed Pluto was at 8:56 Virgo, and it was opposition her Mercury. So through 1974, she'd had Pluto opposition her Mercury. And this must have been all of her realizations about what's going on in where she's working, and the fact that she herself was contaminated by contaminated by plutonium. And you can imagine what kind of impact that might have been having on her, on the way she was thinking, and the fear. I think, much has been made of the fact that she had, is it quaaludes on her she had it in her bloodstream. But why would you take quaaludes? Well, you might take quaaludes if you're under that kind of stress of, in the end, not just having herself contaminated, but it was in her refrigerator. It was just everywhere. And Pluto opposition Mercury is that realization. Also, her sun is starting to move out of Pisces. Sun is directing onto Skeet, the fixed star connected with shipwrecks, accidents. Also, it's onto 0 degrees Aries. Sun is moving on to the Aries point. It's the world at large. So this might be a point where she can become sort of a global figure, someone who is widely recognized and understood. And this, the film of Silkwood, I think it came out in the early 80s. So but within 7 years, she was being. She was very well known, played by Meryl Streep or whatever. You can see that with the sun opposition, the sun moving across the Aries point. Finally, I want to look at the positions of the planets when she had her accident. So this is the chart for the accident. Okay, she would have been dead by 5 minutes past 8 in Crescent, Oklahoma. This was when it was reported. So you can see that she had it just after a new moon. There was a new moon, probably about an hour beforehand. There was a new moon. So that's the accident chart. And what's interesting about the accident chart is how it relates to her chart. This is her chart in the middle, and the charts at the time of the accident on the outer wheel. And there's really some very serious stuff going on in this chart. Firstly, Pluto was at 8:18 Libra. So she had Pluto and she has her Neptune at 8:10 Libra. So while all this was going on, transiting Pluto was exactly conjunct her Neptune. Again, when I was talking about Prince Andrew and the full moon crosses Pluto, it was important perhaps for him because he was part of the collective. Likewise, perhaps with Karen Silkwood, Pluto hitting Neptune loads of people would have Pluto hitting Neptune, transiting Pluto hitting a Neptune. Nothing would happen because it's so generational. But for her, because she is in the eye of the storm, working in a plutonium factory, that Pluto, ruling planet of the ruler of plutonium, is conjunct her Neptune. This is, I suppose, how she dissolves into something higher, but it also represents, I suppose, perhaps some of her fears. So that's a Pluto. Then we have Saturn. Her Saturn was at her natal Saturn is 1840 Cancer. Saturn, when she was killed, was at 1844 Cancer. So she died exactly on her Saturn return. So she It was before her 29th birthday. She was still 28. It was a kind of a bit of an early Saturn return, but she died exactly on her Saturn return, to within 4 minutes. That says to me that in some respects, although her death was certainly a tragedy, when someone dies like that, they were being an activist, they were sort of union official, really making the most of everything they were. This was, in a way, the culmination of her life, moving. And I know she was only 28 when she died, but in a way, in terms of herself, if you take a spiritual perspective, if you say, well, she is someone who she did what she was supposed to be doing. So for herself, for her, that might actually have been a complete life. Then we've got Chiron. She's got her descendant at 1857 Aries, and her Chiron is at 2056 Aries. So Chiron has actually been crossing her 7th house cusp. Chiron, I suppose, might be the wounds inflicted by other people, perhaps the contamination with plutonium and the accident itself. But Chiron was at 20 degrees 56 Aries. Now, her natal Chiron was at 2105 Libra. So that means that Chiron was only 9 minutes from the opposition of her own Chiron. So she had Chiron rising, and Chiron was on her 7th house when she died, and Chiron was almost exactly square her midheaven when she was killed in that car accident. Was it an accident? I don't know. Who killed Karen Silkwood? Maybe Chiron is telling us something about who killed Karen Silkwood. I don't know. But I think the exactitude of that Chiron opposition Chiron, given the fact that she has Chiron rising, I think is really spectacular. This is, I'm afraid, not just the wounded healer, but the killed healer. But it's further evidence that she did what she had to do. I didn't, from a perspective of primary directions, I didn't find anything particularly sort of killing there. But if you look at her Pluto, if you actually move the Earth 28, 29 degrees after she was born, by primary, Pluto will reach her. Pluto is by primary direction, actually hits her Mars. And it seems to be that Pluto hitting her Mars had something to do with her death and her accident. Of course, Pluto goes back to the rulership of plutonium. But yeah, I think the Chiron opposition Chiron is really, really exceptional. And I think it's a chart which firstly shows, I believe, that she died when she died when she was going to die. I think it was I would have said it was a perfect life. Even though she died when she was 28, because she died on her Saturn return, because she died on her exact Chiron opposition Chiron. Sort of a very different person from Prince Andrew. Prince Andrew has all these opportunities, and we've had everything, and look what happened to him. But she perhaps didn't have so much, but she took advantage of everything, and got to lead a perfect life. Might not seem it, but I think that is a perfect life. And she died when she had to die. And I do mean that in all sincerity. Okay, that's all I'm going to say. Thank you. Thanks very much for listening. I hope you found that interesting. If you did find it interesting, I would be grateful if you like this video. If you're not subscribed, I would be grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description.